Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I will now read out the emergency evacuation announcement. Can you hear me all right? Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the entrance doors to the hall, continue straight on and exit the building via the double doors on the right to the car park, which is the assembly point. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that the meeting will be audio recorded. Please switch off mobiles or turn them to silent. Members, there are 4 microphones on the tables for use during the meeting. When I invite you to speak, please wait until there is a microphone in front of you before speaking, as microphones are needed for the hearing loop and for audio recording. Please, where possible, assist in passing microphones to each other. Use the hand gel and antibacterial wipes on the tables if you do touch the microphones. Voting will be done on a show of hands in line with the Constitution. I will ask for a show of hands for and against the recommendations and will then ask for any abstentions. Is that understood, yes? Right. Agenda item 1. Apologies for absence. We haven't received any apologies in the office. Are there any? No. Agenda item 2, substitute members. None have been notified? No. Agenda item 3, non-members attending. There are none. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2021. Are the minutes agreed, members? Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, members? No. Agenda item 6, questions on notice. There are none. Agenda item 7, motions on notice. There are none. Agenda item 8, external auditor report, certification of claims and returns annual report 2019 to 20. Assistant Director Naomi Lucas will present this report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to draw members' attention to the certification of claims and annual returns. In accordance with the Department for Work and Pension requirements, the Council must appoint an external auditor to certify the accuracy of the housing benefit subsidy claim. And in 2019-20, the external auditor was BDO. The reports of BDO is appended and summarises the work on behalf of Rochford District Council's 1920 housing benefit subsidy claim. As a result of the work carried out, BDO checked and certified the Council's housing benefit subsidy claim, which has a total value of £13.2 million. They have issued a qualification letter as a result of some minor errors that they found, but the total value of those errors was only £157. And when those errors are extrapolated out, that results in a further possible adjustment of £19. So members will note that that's not material in comparison to the overall value of the claim. In terms of the fee paid for this work, the fee for 2019-20 was £15,650, which is slightly less than the fee paid in the previous year. And this was as a result of the lower error rates in this year's claim. So as I said, the more detailed report is appended, and happy to try and answer any questions that members may have, but the report is just for noting. Thank you.
Councillor Gadsden.
Thank you. I just wonder, being new to the Audit Committee, there is a few things I'd like to understand a little more. On page 9.10, it states assurance rating, no opinion given, and then it says...
apologies, but I think that's a different item on the agenda.
Are we not... Sorry. Sorry, jumped ahead there. Yes. I thought we'd passed that.
Councillor Dray. Can you wait for the microphone?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously a very involved report, but I apologise I've missed this in the report, but I'd like to know how many claimants there are for housing benefit and the average benefit per claimant. Also, a note was noted in the presentation that there are errors for both under and overpayment. Are those errors rectified back to the individual claimants? And at the time of a claimant making a claim, are there any checks made at that time with regards to any fraudulent claims or possible fraudulent claims?
Thank you, Councillor Dray. I might pass over to Jim in a sec. Just to say, yeah, I don't know offhand the total number of claimants. I don't know if Jim does. Okay, so I'll let him answer that one. Yeah, actually, my mind's gone blank on the second bit. Let me pass it over to Jim and there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. During the 2019-20 period, there was 112 new rent allowance cases. That's ordinary housing benefit, and 94 temporary accommodation claims. And during the year, there were 16,180 changes in circumstances. There was an average caseload of 2,490 for rent allowances and 95 families in temporary accommodation. I'm afraid I don't know the average claim, but it depends on the individual rents. For councils, social housing, it's around £150 a week. For private rentals, it can be £300 or £400 a week, depending on the individual circumstances.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
Right. I know where to sit now. Right. Sorry if I'll repeat that again. During 2019-20, there were 112 new rent allowance cases and 94 new temporary accommodation cases, with 16,180 changes in circumstances which would affect an individual claim. And there was an average caseload of 2,490 rent allowance and 95 temporary accommodations. As I said, the average value will depend on the circumstances of individual claimants, depending on whether they're in private rental or social housing. Any testing identified errors within for the audit, the work I do and the work that the external auditors do, adjustments will be made. Usually the errors of overpayments tend to be errors by the council, so we don't get them, we don't claim those back, and any underpayments are certainly adjusted.
Okay.
Fraud-wise, we do identification checks as much as possible. When a new case is started, there will be inquiries made with the DWP to see if there's what's being paid, and they do keep an eye out ongoing for any potential fraud cases.
Is it down to the individual claimants to let you know their change in circumstances? And is there a maximum period of time that anybody can make a claim?
No, as long as the circumstances meet the requirements for a claim, then the claim will be paid, and it is the responsibility of the claimant to make a change. Should a claim come to light, that's when the case will be looked at for potential overpayments.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Lauren Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Do the DWP actually advise you of changing circumstances, whether they've got the universal credit or any other claimants, PIP or anything else?
Yes, Councillor. When a claimant receives universal credit, that we receive a notification electronically from the DWP, and that advises that someone who's on housing benefit will be moving across. Usually they're allowed a 14-day carry forward of the housing benefits until the universal credit sorts itself out, but after that housing benefit will cease for working age claimants.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Sorry, can you just remind me, it does say in the report somewhere how much we actually get back from DWP, doesn't it? I did just...
Yeah, the claim was for 13.2 million.
Oh,
If there are no further questions, there is one recommendation set out at paragraph 7.1 on page 8.1 of the report, that the certification of claims and returns annual report 2019-20 be noted. Is that noted, members? Agenda item 9, internal audit annual report 2020 to 2021. Chief Audit Executive Mike Porter will present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. As the Council's Chief Audit Executive, I'm required to produce an annual report and opinion that can be used to inform the Council's governance statement. The opinion itself must conclude on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's arrangements for governance, risk management and internal control. The opinion is actually derived from the work we carry out during the course of the year and other sources of assurance provided to myself. The Audit Committee actually receives a number of regular progress reports on delivery against the audit plan and is informed of changes to the plan. These changes were notified to the committee in November 2020 and again in March 2021. Appendix 1 at 9.7 provides a summary of the internal audit work completed during the course of the year. Since the last audit committee in March, a further 7 audit engagements have been completed relating to 2021. And these are set out at Appendix 2. A total of 19 audit engagements were completed during 2020-21. 3 of these audit engagements received limited assurance opinion, 13 inadequate or good opinion, and 3 where no opinion was provided. In relation to those 3 audits where no actually opinion is provided, these relate to grant certification work, where an audit opinion is not required, and also in relation to consultancy work. In relation to also counter-fraud work, the Council continues to make significant cashable savings for the Council, both in terms of council tax and business rates. Also, during the 2021, the Council processed a wide range of business-related grants. These were also subject to review by internal audit, and no significant issues were identified. Despite making changes to the plan during the course of the year, this revised plan has not affected my ability to provide an opinion. Sufficient work is still being completed during the year to enable me to provide an annual RIP opinion. In terms of the opinion for 2021, there's no change from the previous year, in that I'm providing adequate assurance that the Council's arrangements for risk management, internal control and governance generally concord with best practice and are fundamentally sound. There are some opportunities for improvements, and these are identified in the annual governance statement. I'm quite happy to take any questions you may have.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. In item 9, Appendix 1, there are good, limited, adequate. Are the Council now ensuring that we get these to good, please? We don't actually review or take a further look at an audit engagement, so we don't actually revise
that opinion. What we do is basically make a number of recommendations and basically monitor implementation of those recommendations. So if we were to take that audit again, we would hope that with the implementation of the recommendations that the assurance rating would go up. But we don't actually change the rating provided at the time of audit. We would be subject to another audit itself. So we would have to undertake another audit and provide another opinion. So effectively, we don't provide a revised opinion.
Thank you. So you don't go back and address the ones that are unlimited or adequate at this stage. You would do it next year.
Well, we wouldn't necessarily do it again. What we do is make sure the recommendations made in relation to that audit are followed up. So the control weaknesses identified are addressed. So basically, where we're saying there's a weakness or a problem with this area, we would make a recommendation. We would then check that that recommendation is implemented. Therefore, if we were to issue a revised report, the opinion would be changed, but we don't issue a revised report.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Dray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I note, I think it's Appendix 4 in the progress of audit recommendations. There are a number of implementation dates, some of which have been extended. In one case, the extension date was over a year. And I'm just wondering if there's any authorisation needed for such an extension, or if that is reported anywhere to members of the council.
Yes, I mean, what would happen is that the service department would come back to internal audit and ask for an extension, and we would consider the reasons why there's a need for to move the date in effect. I mean, during COVID, there's been other priorities, so the council have focused on other activities. So a large number of the audit recommendations themselves have been pushed back. But these are generally the low priority recommendations. If they're significant or major recommendations, they would be implemented within the first 3 months. So the ones that are generally being pushed back because of other priorities like COVID-19 or the council's response to COVID, they're the only ones that are being pushed back, the low priority ones.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chairman, perhaps I can suggest that any long-term further extension of implementation date be reported back to the Audit Committee as and when required, so that we can keep an eye on things as well, instead of it coming to this this date and this report.
I think they often are, aren't they?
But yeah, the dates, the table presented here in the annual report, that's part of the quarterly progress reports. So this is repeated every quarter. So you'll get sight of this progress, of this table every quarter. So every 3 months you'll get to see the recommendations.
Okay, that's fine. One other observation. Also, it notes in the report that there's been a possible fraud, or there's a possibility of fraud, whereby invoices are being paid where there is no valid order. Now that signals danger to me. Is that being rectified in order to stop that practice?
Chairman, there were 2 audits we did this year. One was on procurement, which were identified sometimes they're not raising orders before we get the invoice. But we have a policy where invoices are not paid unless there is an order, and testing within the creditors audit found this to be the case. So we have a degree of protection on that one. And all the orders that we have in that category, I think it's down to people trying to sort of do things quickly rather than doing anything untoward. And I've not come across any evidence of anything that was not purchased, anything that was purchased that wasn't required or part of the processes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Gadsden.
In that case, does that mean there's a delay in us paying our suppliers?
Unfortunately, that can be the case, yes, because the invoices are returned to the service area to raise the orders, and it is affecting the performance, which I think is highlighted in the procurement report on page... it might have been the previous audit. Sorry, I think it actually might have been it's on page 9.18.
Any further questions?
I was only going to follow up by saying that I feel that, you know, this is a consideration that we need to maybe act quicker on, because larger suppliers can obviously take delays, but small businesses this would impact greatly on. And whilst I understand the explanation that people do try to cut corners in order to be quicker and to deal with the tasks they've got to do, I do feel that sometimes small suppliers this could impact on greatly. It's a concern.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, I think one of the things is to make sure that purchase orders are actually raised up front, because that is the process. You raise a purchase order, you then produce a GRN. So basically, it's about education, making sure that actually these purchase orders are being raised at the right time, and therefore, when an invoice comes in, it's matched to the goods received note and automatically paid. So it's about educating service departments actually to basically produce that purchase order at the right time.
Can I also say it's about management control? I mean, it's one thing having training employees, but it's also about supervision and management, and I think that's one of the functions to make sure these things are done.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, we'll note that. Councillor Lauren Shaw.
Thank you. As going from Eileen, Councillor Gadsden and Councillor Dray, I find it very concerning that we are actually, we have staff and management must be authorising these staff to go out and order items that we haven't got orders for. And they're not getting, I thought we should have 3 recorded quotes. And it seems that we're not having them. So I think this is an area we've certainly got to look at. Thank you.
To the Chair, this particular audit was restricted to purchases of up to £10,000 where there is a lower level of proof. Anything over £10,000 prior testing has shown that to be working in line with the instructions. It's the smaller transactions, and although it's a £10,000 limit, the majority of these are in the sort of lower thousands or high hundreds.
Can I come back, please? Yes. Yeah, it may be a small level, but we've got to always remember this is our residents' money, not our own money, and we've got to be mindful that we are using this properly. When we go through budgets, we're always asked to find ways of keeping our budget in order, which we've done. But if we're getting a couple of £1,000 here, a couple of £1,000 there without purchase orders or proper quotes, we can lose the plot on this. And I personally don't think this is acceptable. Thank you.
Is it okay if I just come back on that? Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously the council does take a risk-based approach in terms of the level of order and the proportionality of the checks that it undertakes. I don't want to repeat what Jim's just said, but obviously there's a lower kind of burden of checking and proof that's required for smaller value orders, and we haven't had any evidence to suggest for larger orders that there is non-compliance, but I do accept the point that there should be compliance at all levels, but the number of quotes that's required for this lower level of expenditure is not always necessary to obtain 3 quotes for that level of expenditure. But nonetheless, this has been a sort of continuing theme out of the procurement audit, so it is something that we continue to educate, as Mike said, in terms of training, so that all members of staff are aware of the requirements on them. Thank you.
Sorry, can I come back? So can I ask, with staff reviews, is this sort of thing that you log and check over that they're making progress, that they're not continuing with the same problems or issues with this?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we do have regular updates at leadership team, and our procurement officer does provide a regular update report in terms of compliance, and we do follow up on specific instances of non-compliance to identify why those have occurred and try to address those. So yes, we do have regular information on that.
So you're monitoring staff and review, and it's on their reviews.
We
Progress.
monitor at a kind of service level, and where there's individual instances, we would follow up as appropriate with individual officers. And if there was obviously repeat kind of offenders, if you like, then we would take that up with the individual concerned.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody happy with that? Any further questions? No? So there's one recommendation set out at paragraph 12 of this report, that the Chief Audit Executive's opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council systems of governance, risk management and internal control be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
Agenda item 10, draft annual governance statement for 2020-21. Jim Cavani will present the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This report introduces the annual governance statement for 2020-21. This is a public assessment on how effective we believe our governance arrangements were during the past year, including the systems of internal control and management of risk. This remains a live document until the accounts for 2020-21 are signed off by internal audit and may require an update by that time. This is the reason for the recommendation number 2 on page 10.3. Starting on page 10.7, there is a general narrative of the key governance issues that impacted on the year, and statements from the Head of Paid Service, Head of Finance, the Monitoring Officer, and the Chief Audit Executive, whose annual report presented as agenda item 9 tonight, forms a key part of that assessment. The statement also reflects input from the leadership team as a whole. In November last year, this committee approved a revised local code of corporate governance. This assessment from page 10.14 measures compliance against this code. In prior years, there was a bulky narrative for this section, but this year we have tried to create a more visual approach, which we believe helps to clarify compliance and areas for improvement. It must be remembered that this is an assessment of governance and not a report on all that was done by the Council across the year. On page 10.24, there is an update on matters that were identified as governance issues going into the year, and the table at 10.27 details issues to be considered going into 2021-22. Thank you.
Any questions, members? No questions? Members, there are 2 recommendations set out at paragraph 11.1 on page 10.3 of the report. Number 1 is that the annual governance statement for 2020-21 be endorsed and referred to the acting manager, director and leader of the council for signature. And number 2, that the authority is delegated to the chair of the audit committee to endorse non-significant changes to the AG annual governance statement following review by the council's external auditors. Are you happy to take these recommendations en bloc? Those members in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you, members. Please lower your hands. I think that was unanimous. All right. Can those members against please raise their hands? So can you now please vote for those recommendations? Those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Agenda item 11. Review of the Council's Risk Register 2021 to 2022. Our Assistant Director of Resources, Naomi Lucas, will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report is one that is presented to Audit Committee members twice a year and presents the Council's Corporate Risk Register for your consideration. The last version of the register was presented in November 2020. At that point, we actually did a review of all of the corporate risks, particularly in light of COVID-19. Since that date, we've reviewed half of those risks, which are detailed in paragraph 3.5, and the second half of those risks will be reviewed in the following 6 months. So the corporate risk register itself is summarised on page 11.6 of the report, and then the detailed risks are then set out in the following pages. There hasn't been a huge amount of updates required to the corporate risk register since it was last brought to Audit Committee. The only risk which has been amended is risk 4. Incident response, which has been updated to reflect the completed migration to the cloud-based IT system for the Council, and to consider remote working practices which have reduced the risks associated with IT and business continuity. The other risks, although they have been reviewed by the risk owners, have not resulted in any updates at this point in time. The report just details a few of the corporate risks which have a high residual risk rating, and the risks themselves detail the control measures that are put in place to help manage those risks. But even so, for health and safety, risk 3B, risk 9, balanced budget, and risk 10, inability to recruit and retain, all of those risks retain a high residual risk rating, even though there are controls in place to help manage those. Finally, section 5 just notes some of the key kind of strategic risks facing the Council, including COVID-19 and the impact of the UK's exit from the European Union. So the report is just for noting, I believe, but if anyone has got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Any questions, members? No questions? Right, members, there is one recommendation set out at paragraph 14.1 on page 11.4 of the report, that the contents of the corporate risk register for 2021 be noted. Members, is that noted?
Noted.
I would like to thank Naomi and Jim and Mike for their presentations tonight, and all the staff for their continued work with getting this done. But that now concludes the business for this evening, and the meeting is now closed at 8:04. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.